We'll talk about the roles and responsibilities of the DSMB as an entity, as a committee. So they're overseeing safety, they're monitoring the ethical conduct, they're monitoring the study integrity, and they're monitoring the equipoise of interventions. Everybody's familiar with the term equipoise. Equipoise is the French term that means equal position. So a clinical trial can ethically only be done when the two interventions are not one known to have one better than the other. So they're equally considered as beneficial. And so if there is already convincing evidence that one is better than the other, whether it's evidence in your country or evidence someplace else, it may not be considered ethical to do another trial on that same intervention. So they will be monitoring the equipoise of interventions, and we'll talk about the interim analysis, conditional power, the possibility of early termination. We'll be doing more of that tomorrow morning. But the part of overseeing safety and monitoring the ethical conduct, we'll be talking a little bit about that today, as their role and responsibility of the data safety monitoring. Then we'll talk about a little bit about their logistics, who they interact with, and how they interact with these folks, and the fact that their independence from the study sponsor and study investigators. So I'll talk a little bit about the structure of multi-center clinical trials and where does the DSMB fit in? Why are they there? And where should they be? Who do they talk to? Who they don't talk to? So welcome as well. So this is what we're going to do in the first part in the introductory role. So when somebody's conducting a randomized controlled trials, you have designed a protocol, you have the protocol approved, you get funding to do it, and now you're going to start to do your study. And you have very careful protocol that is now explained in a manual of operations. And so every center that's participating in a study, every investigator, every study team member knows their role, knows what they have to do to have the study be conducted. But these are humans, and we all humans, if we're given the opportunity to not follow something strict, we will follow, we want to follow. So one thing is to design a study with a very nice protocol that is standardizing procedures. And then the only thing that's going to be different is that one group is getting an intervention A and the other group is getting the intervention B. And we want people to follow the protocol. We better monitor while the study is happening to make sure that the study that was well designed is well conducted. And so there's two ways or two groups you could think of that are monitoring. There's the internal monitoring that the study team is doing and the study investigators are doing. So there will be what? There will be several things that they're monitoring. They'll be monitoring the recruitment. If we're not recruiting well, we are in trouble. We need to have a certain recruitment rate. We have to have sufficient numbers that we already have planned and designed for in a given time period. If we need 200 people or we need 500 people in 6 months or in 2 years, all of this costs money. So the recruitment numbers and the recruitment rate is what they're monitoring. They also don't want to have people lost to follow. They want retention to be good. They also want follow-up to be done according to their protocol. People must be coming for study visits every whatever period, every 2 months or month 2 and at month 8 and at month this. People are coming or people are not coming. What is happening? So the people that are running the study want to know what we call process variables. variables that are telling us if my process of doing the trial is going well. Also, we look at the administration of the intervention. And I like to make a distinction between the participants adhering to what they're supposed to be doing, but also I like to talk about the staff complying with the protocol, because the staff have to do some things too, that sometimes we have to measure their blood pressure this way. We have to take their blood this way. We have to counsel them this way. And the staff may not be also compliant with following their assigned test. Participants have to adhere to the intervention that they've been assigned to. They may not follow it necessarily. So we would like, the study team would like to monitor that. But also now the data, the quality of the assessments, not only the study outcomes or clinical endpoints, but secondary variables, covariates. We want data to be of high quality. We don't want things measured sloppily. Yeah, you want your BMI, but oh yeah, you can stand on this scale, may not be calibrated. You may have keys with you, you may have all sorts of stuff. So then the weights for some people, and you're adding noise to it. So we have these protocols that make sure that people do things in what we call an experimental way. We randomized controlled trials are experiments on humans. And so the experimental way, the way I think about it is, when I was in high school in chemistry lab, what did we do? We had certain experiments that we did. We had certain reagents in certain concentrations at a certain temperature, at a certain pressure, and we changed one thing and saw what happened. That's what we're trying to do in a randomized controlled trial. We want to have everything be exactly the same, but we don't have clones of people. We have to take into account that there is heterogeneity in the people, but we try to homogenize them by inclusion and exclusion criteria. We then have a standard protocol that they have to follow. And so everything is the same for everybody. The one thing that's different is who gets A, who gets B. And that's why we randomize. That's why we can then say that the effect that we were observing was due to that intervention, yes or no. But that's what the study team does internally to monitor what we call the process variables, the study integrity overall in being done properly. But we also have external monitoring. And external monitoring is done differently by different organizations. We have every study that has humans will have to pass a review board, an ethics review board, that's usually at the institutional level. So if we do a study in CMC, we have to have the institutional review board, ethics review board of CMC decide whether this study is ethical or not. Then we sometimes may have some study oversight committees. That's not very common, but that's an optional. But we have a data and safety monitoring board. And that looks at the study integrity process variables. So they look at the same things that the study team is looking at, but they're looking at it by intervention arm. So the difference is that while the study team is seeing these things, they're either monitoring it on an individual level, individual patient level, but not in the aggregate necessarily. And if they do it in the aggregate, they do it for everybody, not in the intervention, by intervention arms. So they will look at retention, overall retention, or follow-up overall. And so they will look, this group now looks at the same process variables to look at study integrity, but they have also the additional monitoring of study outcomes and adverse events. And this is the role that they have that's unique to them, right? They're monitoring externally, and we'll say why they're external and why they're the ones that are entrusted to do this. So this board, by definition, is a group of independent, and independent is bold. They're separate from the study team and the study investigators. They're not members of their staff at the same institution, usually not, from another group. They have to have pertinent expertise, and we'll talk about what sort of expertise is expected, that reviews on a regular basis the accumulating data from usually one clinical trial. Sometimes they may do it if there's many similar trials. The institution that's sponsoring the trials, that could be like the National Institutes of Health or the ICMR, for example, may say, well, there are these 4 trials on this topic, and so we want one board to monitor the 4 trials because they want to get information from one trial to the, that may help them understand what may be going on in another trial. But most commonly, it's just one trial per data safety monitoring board. And the second important word here is that the DSMB advises the sponsor. So they are enlisted by the sponsor to do the monitoring of the study externally. And they have an advisory role to the sponsor. They are not an advisory role to the study investigators. I'll make that clear. They are, if the sponsor, if it's an investigator initiated study, then the sponsors are the investigators. In that case, they are. But in general, if the sponsor is an external agency or something like that, and not, they are the ones that are responsible to creating the DSMB, and DSMB advises the sponsor. What do they advise them on? This protocol has been approved. The study is going to be started. They're not advising them on how to design the study. They're advising them on whether there is continuing safety of trial subjects, and also maybe safety for those yet to be recruited, and also whether the study integrity is there, the study is valid, is being done properly, you'll get a valid result, and scientific merit of the trial. So many people call these things data monitoring committees. Why? Because it's 3 words instead of 5 words. Data and safety monitoring. And some people call it data safety monitoring committee. And my senior who had given me that experience, he made it a point to tell me, you should never call it data safety, because it's not safety of the data. And it's not data monitoring, because they're not only monitoring data. Their primary role is safety and study integrity, which is data. And so it is data and safety. But you know, most people, just because of laziness, they have 3 words instead of 5 words. They call it DMC. It's the same thing, but I personally prefer DSMB. You could call it a committee or call it a board, doesn't matter. So we used to call it DSMC, but it doesn't come out of your tongue as easy as DSMB. So everybody now goes DSMB. That's exactly the same thing. So people call it by other names here. You can find that, but more commonly you will find DMC for shorthand, but hopefully I convince you that the Data and Safety Monitoring Board, DSMB, is the one to use. All right. These DSMBs follow these International Council of Harmonization E9 guidelines. I assume all of you know why we have the International Council of Harmonization. This, if not, I'll just very briefly say, what used to happen in the past is that many countries and regions would say, if a new drug or a new indication is going to be used in our country, it has to be tested in our country and so forth. So the United States had that rule that, no, if you have tested this in Europe and shown that it works in Europe, we have to do another trial in the United States to make sure that it did. And in Europe, the European Union said, oh, no, if it's tested in France, or it's okay for Germany. So they trusted each other. Japan did not trust, but they realized that, if they've done it properly in one of these places, then why they've already shown that this is better than the other one, equipoise is gone. So it's actually unethical for me to demand that they do it in my people and show it that it's also beneficial in my people. So these three groups got together, the Japanese, the European Medical Association or Medicines Agency, and the US FDA. And they said, okay, if we follow these guidelines and we do it under this guidelines, then we will trust the results of your study and they don't have to be redone in our setting. Okay. And so it came out, I think it was in late 1900s, at the turn of the century. And then they had guidelines for conducting studies. And so they had the ICH, International Council of Harmonization, of technical requirements for registration of pharmaceuticals for human use, is the whole word for it. And they had different parts on how to do the study, how to do this, that. So there's E1, E2, E3. So E9 is the one for statistical principles for clinical trials. And so this is what DSMBs adhere to, the guidelines. So what do they monitor? So the guidelines say you should monitor the quality of the study. You should monitor the safety of the participants, and you should monitor the equipoise of the treatment arms. We call that, the terms that you usually hear are they do safety, efficacy, and futility. I am a little bit more worried about semantics, and I like to say that they also are monitoring the quality of the data. And if the quality of the data is bad, then you may get what I call operational futility. Or the study is being done so sloppily that the quality of this is just garbage. And so the study is futile in the sense of not being able to be conclusive because of the poor quality of the study. Safety, safety. And then equipoise of the treatment arms being compared can be broken down into efficacy. We've shown efficacy already. So therefore, maybe we should not continue the study. Or we are not able to do it. We'll be inconclusive. It's futile from an equipoise standpoint to continue. So I call that the equipoise futility. But I'm the only crazy person that does that, as far as I know. People just say futility and they only think about one type of futility. I think of two types of futility. One is the operational one, and one is the equipoise one. These things will become more clear as we go along and how they monitor these things. Now, these regulations, that was what the United States follows the International Council of Harmonization, and different agencies in different countries have their regulations that talk about DSMBs. In Canada, it's Health Canada. They had the revised draft in 2009. The United States has the guidance for industry by the US FDA. They're actually currently in a draft revision for the fourth revision, I think, in 2024. They're still revising it, making changes. In Europe, they have the European Medicines Agency that had it in 2005 guidelines. What about India? India does too. In 2024, so last year in December, this is why we're having the workshop now, because last year in December, they came out with this. Now, who came out with this is JIPMER, which is the Jawaharlal Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research, which is in Puducherry. They came out with guidelines. And they had this in December of last year. And they say, well, they give a definition, the committee of experts that monitors the data emerging from a clinical trial on a periodic basis and advises, again, advises the sponsor, researcher, and ethics committee regarding the continuing safety of trial participants and the continuing validity and scientific merit of the trial. Now, I didn't copy this with my previous slide. My previous slide was from a course that I did 4 years ago. So they're also using it. So the same words are everywhere. Everywhere people are following these things. They actually go on, you can read this. They had the first paragraph said, what happened was there are guidelines in various governmental documents and ICMR that state that adequate provisions must be made for monitoring and the conduct of the research, including the constitution of a DSMB, if applicable. Reports of monitoring done by the sponsor and DSMB reports may also be sought. The institution must have introduced policies that establish a mechanism to ensure quality of the data and safety of interventions, such as monitoring, auditing, DSMBs. So they permeate this in government documents. But this document by JIPMER says, however, all of these documents do not provide specific guidelines. They just have these words that did not give guidance to either institutions or investigators on how to do this and how they should function. And so DSMBs are also not specifically referred to in the new drugs and clinical trials group. So because of that, they decided to give their own guidelines to people at their institute. And they based it on the same things that everybody's basing on, the US FDA, the European Medical One, and so on. These guidelines are essentially the guidelines we're going to be talking about. They are very good guidelines that JIPMER has that are, it's basically the same that internationally are being shared. So everybody around the world that is doing clinical trials are following these guidelines. A little bit about the history of where these things came from. In 1967, Professor Greenberg, that I mentioned before, was the chair of a committee that was charged with, by the National Institutes of Health in the United States, to come out on how should multi-center studies be organized. And this was in part due to several high-profile studies, one in diabetes, one in heart disease, that were actually being monitored by the investigators that were conducting the study. Investigators conducting a study have an incredible conflict of interest. If I have to judge how well I'm performing, hey, I'm biased. I'm always doing great. If you ask your child, can you tell me how you're doing? They're always doing great. So nobody's going to criticize themselves and say, oh, we're not doing this study well. So you need somebody different. And you have, that's one conflict, but there's other conflict is all of these studies, every study we do requires funds. And unless one of you is Bill Gates, you have to get funding from somebody. And funding from somebody comes from some organization. You write a proposal, you get it funded, they give you funds. If you stop your study early, you decide to do that, what do you have to do? Return unused funds. How many of you like to give back money that's been given to you? Nobody. So no investigator, they have a conflict of interest. They would never stop a study early, even though it may be harmful to the patients, even though it is worthless to continue because it's poor quality or because the event rate is not high enough, you don't have enough power, it's very futile to go on. People would just go on. What is the problem with going on when you should not be going on? It's not just the money part, it is ethics. These people that are participating in your trial are giving up part of their life, their health, for you to get more money and waste their time. They could be getting other more efficacious treatments while they're wasting their time on you. What if they die because their disease progressed and the study was this a nonsense intervention? So ethics is what drives clinical trials in general, and it drives the behavior of the data safety monitoring boards as well. So based on that report, it takes government agencies everywhere a long time to do anything. 1979, they recommend independent data safety monitoring. And in 1988, the US Food and Drug Administration gave the first version of guidelines for proper monitoring. And but the procedures for the DSMB's functioning were not really well worked out. And so in 1992, they invited folks to come to NIH. And in fact, my director went. I was now not senior, not junior. I was not invited, but he was invited to discuss approaches to data monitoring. And then, in 1995, the ICH comes out, and in 1998, the NIH issues the policy requiring multi-center trials to use DSMBs. We'll talk about which trials require DSMBs, which trials may get away with not having a DSMB. But they required it mainly for drug-related trials, trials in high-risk populations, where what you're studying is a bad disease or condition. You have potential adverse effects of the medication, that people could die if they're not getting this, so high-risk population, high-risk interventions, and so forth. The European Medicines Agency and the WHO published their guidelines, and in 2006, this was the guidelines for doing trials. Now they have the guidelines for E9 for establishing DSMBs. So why a DSMB? What did this evolution talk about? They said that the group must first of all be independent, because the oversight needs to be objective. There should have no conflict of interest. Your nephew is the investigator, you cannot be on that board. If you own stocks in the pharmaceutical company that's drug being tested, you cannot be on that board. Usually, you cannot be on the board if you are from the same institution, because you say, well, if I criticize a study that's being done in my institution, my director may fire me, or my salary may not be increased. You have a conflict of interest. And so the conflict of interest is a serious matter. And when you serve on a board, you have to, when you're invited, the first thing they will send you is they have to disclose if you have any possible conflict of interest. And every meeting, the first thing that is asked is, has your conflict of interest changed? Because now something may have changed. You have to declare it and sign it again. We want to protect the integrity of the clinical trial from adverse impact resulting from access to trial information. So the people have to be independent, so that that knowledge that these people get is not going to impact in any way the conduct of the study as per protocol. As I said, in 1998, they had it for all NIH supported or conducted clinical trials. They said it for multi-site clinical trials involving interventions that entail potential risk to the participants. Okay, mostly, but the design of clinical trials is not just for drugs, it's not just for devices, it's not just for surgeries, it is for anything where you have an intervention. It can be a counseling intervention. It can be psychiatric counseling, or it could be a new educational curriculum that you want to see if it works better than the past educational curriculum. So interventions are not always clinical drug, device, etc. The methodology for clinical trials applies to all of these sorts of interventions. You still want to try to control everything and want to change one thing, etc. Should those trials have a data safety monitoring? Well, it used to be that common sense worked, and so you would not have one of those trials. But we had one trial that was looking at reducing obesity in staff that work at institutions of higher education. So they were like colleges and universities. The staff in the United States very obese, and they were trying to have an intervention that would get them to lose weight. And we had an adverse event where one person decided it was not part of the intervention, it was not part of anything that was told to them. This person decided to run a marathon and collapse with a heart attack and die on his own. Did this. Now what? There's a safety issue in something that had absolutely nothing to do with drugs. It was counseling. They'd actually given them messages on their desktop computer to monitor, to stand up, do this, exercise, whatever, not to run marathons. But so safety may be an issue even in those sorts of studies. The NIH now is so bureaucratic that they say any study that we fund better have a DSMB, regardless of what kind. So we need to have people trained to be DSMB members. In 2000, for example, they said even phase 1, phase 2 of DSMB may be appropriate if the studies have multiple clinical sites or blinded, employ particularly high-risk interventions or vulnerable populations. So this is again a reiteration. The new document in 2006 is now being revised now in 2024, and they say the same things. That there's have little subtleties that they change it every time, and they say that they review on a regular basis. They are an advisory one to the sponsor, and they are advised on the continuing of the study. So do all randomized controlled trials require a DSMB? In my opinion, no. If you're funded by NIH, yes, regardless of what type of study you're doing. But if a study is going to be a study that's done like a surgical study where you have lots of patients, you only need 200 patients, and your hospital is an ophthalmology specialty hospital like the one in Madurai, you can probably do 200 patients in a week. And the volume of work that they do over 100, close to 200 patients a day. That was 10 years ago. Maybe they do more now. So the study doesn't last more than a month. You don't even have time to schedule a DSMB meeting. You just rely on the ethics board approving the study. So they have to last a sufficient amount of time for this to matter. They have to have, some clinically serious conditions and high-risk vulnerable groups. That I do agree with that. Now, every study, when does the DSMB function? The role is when? When you're doing a study, you start off with an idea. Hopefully you get funding at some point soon, not years later. You then have a planning stage, you start the trial. What is starting the trial? The first subject is randomized. Then maybe your recruitment ends here. You're doing follow-up, and the end of follow-up, but the last subject randomized reaches the end of their follow-up. Then you do the analysis and funding ends, whatever. So I think the purview of time that the DSMB is working is this. From the first subject randomized, because their job is to protect the safety, right? until the last subject has reached the end of their follow. It's not at the end of recruitment, it's not that, it's during the entire study duration. But once the study ends, they'll end the follow for everybody, their role ends. They're not part of the study team, they're not involved in any publication, they're usually never even mentioned. Who was the member. Sometimes I'll just give them credit in the back acknowledgements, etc. But that's not expected, and that one should not expect to have that happen. Now, if you don't have a DSMB, are there any alternatives? If I'm doing a little pilot study, or I'm doing a feasibility study with 50 people or whatever, I'm doing a small phase 2 study, it's non-regulated, it's a single center, or it's short duration, or it's low-risk participants, or low-risk interventions. Do I need one? Depends on your rules of your country. Like if the Indian Council of Medical Research says yes, then yes, we will do it. But common sense, hopefully, dictates that you may not. Now, for some pilot, if they're big pilots, yes. If they're big this, that, if it's a long time, yes. So if you don't have one, usually one would advise you to have a medical officer to monitor the safety of that from an external. They will not maybe look at efficacy because these studies are not necessarily they don't have power to look at these sorts of things. So you're not going to do all of that fancy interim analysis stuff that we'll talk about tomorrow, but they would monitor the safety. What if you're doing a small pilot study and of the first eight people randomized 4 and 4, all 4 die in one, and stop. You need to stop this thing. Somebody needs to look at it. Or yes, you may have a phase 2 trial that's a little bit big. 200 people, something like that. Maybe you're not going to change practice with this. It's not going to be regulated. You're going to maybe move to a phase 3 if it works. You may be able to get away with an institutional committee. So colleagues from your department or other departments at your institute can be, so it's not really external. You may be able to get away with it. Or you may altogether say, I'm not going to do it. And if your ethics board allows you, you're fine. So there are alternatives, but I'm going to talk about when you have to have one, how do they function, what is their role. So let's say we have a multi-site RCT, and we have different organizations in that. So this is the classic multi-site study where the sponsor, like a pharma company, decides, I want to do this study. And so they are ones that are sort of running the study. They decide the protocol. They decide how they want the study to be done. They make all the decisions and all the policies for that study. They usually, of course, have an internal support team that does it. And the sponsor then contracts out a contract research organization to do the data and administrative organization of the trial, coordination, etc. They contract out the clinical sites to get patients. They pay very well, but they contract us out. They contract out sometimes, if necessary, laboratory imaging, whatever other support they need for that. And they're the ones that are running the show. So their DSMB is something that they will create and an advisory role to them. And this group is independent from all of these people and has no conflict of interest in being part of it. Now, sometimes we have investigator-initiated studies. And this is when a group of investigators gets together, gets a proposal done to a funding agency, and now they are doing a trial. They're running the show. In this one, these people have investigators. The CRO has an investigator, The clinical site has investigators. These people have investigators, but they're not scientifically involved in the protocol. They are given the protocol to implement it. They just run the study. So I personally call them not scientific investigators. They may be called all sorts of great titles, but when it comes down to it, they may be even, some of them may be gifted authorship of the paper, but they didn't design the study. They only contributed patients. That's different from, oh, well, how does the data flow? Data flows from the sites, and the support groups, to the CRO, which then prepares the reports for the DSMB. But that differs from investigator-initiated RCTs. So a group of investigators comes up with a trial. They go and seek funding from a sponsor. So the sponsor is there to give money. That's it. But they don't run the show. The investigators run the show. And so they are scientific investigators. They set the policy through their steering committee, because maybe there's too many clinical sites. But each site has investigators, and they're scientific investigators, just like here and just like here. Now, then the DSMB is external again to all of these people that they report to. Yes, they give recommendations to the people running the show. So they are advisory to the group that is running the show. But they make a distinction between the pharma one running the show versus a group of investigator-initiated people running the show. And again, the data flow is the same from the sites to the CRO to the DSMB. All right, so what are the interactions of the DSMB? How does the DSMB, who do they talk to? What do they do? Do they not listen to this? So they, first of all, are independent from the sponsor or the investigator teams. The study team, the study organizations, they act independently. So, but sites are doing, there's institutional review boards and ethics boards at every site. So what usually happens? Where is their role? Well, the IRBs usually in every institute approve the study before it starts. It's ethical to do it. But usually they don't do the monitoring, because the monitoring is of the whole study, not of the individual site. So they will rely on the DSMB for continuing ethical conduct during the study. Now, it's not very common, but some institutions are very demanding, and they'll say, I want you, DSMB, after your meeting, to give me a report. Some DSMBs don't like to do it, but usually they'll just send a little summary report that says the study is being conducted ethically. That's it. So the DSMB may need to inform the IRBs, but they don't do it directly. They don't communicate with the, they will tell the investigators or the sponsor, and then the sponsor will go, or the investigators institution will go that way, the communication. What about regulatory bodies? Studies being done by pharma, et cetera, and they have the board? No, that's the role of the sponsor. So the DSMB has absolutely no interaction with the FDA or anything like that. It's not their job. That's the job of the sponsor or the group of investigators. It's an investigator mission. What about the CRO? Well, the CRO gives them reports. So it's a one-directional thing. They don't have to tell them anything. They get the periodic reports from the data center. What about the study investigators? They, after their meetings, they provide feedback on study integrity, process variables, and safety concerns. So they will give a report, feedback report, we'll talk more about it soon. And finally, what about the sponsor? They're constituted by the sponsor. So they provide recommendations on study continuance, yes or no. Study is going well, or the study is not going well. They give their recommendations to it. So the purpose, or the DSMBs are considered to be the stewardship of a trial. They have responsibilities for those subjects in terms of safety, and the sponsor in terms of trial credibility. So they're protecting the safety of participants, ensuring the credibility and integrity of the trial, that the trial gets to its term, where its results can be disseminated, or identified violations of the protocol that suggest that you should change things, or there's studies being done with high dropout rates, and so it's unlikely to produce credible results, or they want to ensure the validity of study results. So they have a lot of responsibility. And so how do they function? So once they're constituted, prior to the start of the study, they evaluate and endorse the scientific design and safety protocols, which already have been approved and already have been funded. But if they don't like them, for whatever reason, they can say, no, this is not I don't care who approved it. This is not a good study for this reason, this reason, this reason. It's very unlikely, right? Because protocols have gone through quite a bit of external review, and funding agencies scrutinize these things. They may offer written advice on potential protocol modifications if they're needed. But one thing that they do is they review carefully what's called the DSMB charter. And Kumar is going to talk more in detail about the charter when it comes to it. Now, during the study conduct, their role function is to deliver independent, expert, and prompt assessments and study data, monitoring the safety, clinical effectiveness, cumulative serious adverse events. They perform urgent data reviews to address safety concerns, if the study should continue or be halted due to safety or futility. And they give recommendations that are documented to the sponsor, whether the study should advance or not due to any of these things. So that's what they do during the study. What do they do after the study ends? Nothing. They're gone. They're not part of anything else. Their role ends when the study ends. That's it. So it's not something that for that particular study, their role ends. So how are they created? They should ideally be established before the first participant is randomized. The sponsor is the one that is in charge, and the sponsor can be a pharma sponsor, if it's a pharma study, or the group of steering committee that are running. It should not have said the sponsor. It should say the people running the study, the show, initiates the creation of the DSMB after the investigators are there. And so there may be some procedures, and they have standard operating procedures who should be there. So what is usually the typical constitution of a DSMB? Usually it's 3 to 5 people. It's not a big group. It used to be that they wanted an odd number so that there is a majority vote. In my experience, since 1986, and now I'm getting on to 29 years of experience on this, we have never had to vote. We always discuss it ad nauseum until we get to a consensus decision by the board members. So really don't need an odd number. It still is the books, preferably it should be an odd number. No. It always can be 4, can be 6, doesn't matter. But you don't want too many people. And they make recommendations to the sponsor. I want to be very clear, they never make a decision. They always make recommendations. The decisions are taken by the sponsor. But they will recommend to the sponsor to continue or not continue. And they will recommend to the sponsor, you need to do this, you need to do that. The sponsor may disregard their recommendations. It's up to them. But usually, again, in my experience, I would say 98% of the time, they've agreed with the recommendations. There's been a few times they did not like it. Now, who is there as members? There should be clinicians of whatever discipline is being studied. Oncology, dentistry, hematology, whatever it is. being studied, they should have those people there. You should have people with statistical methodology. In fact, that first data safety monitoring board that I was on, and I was at this, my first ever, was in ophthalmology, which was an area that I had no knowledge on and I had not worked on. And I was asked to be the chair of this. So a junior person, statistician, not a clinician, to be the chair of a data safety monitoring board. Why? Because the director of the National Eye Institute believed firmly that the chairs should be methodologists, not clinicians. And you will hopefully see why there's a lot of that coming up later. So you should have also somebody with medical ethics, because their training is very different from our training or the clinicians' training on the ethical part. And these are, the decisions are always driven by ethics. And then sometimes you have, sometimes you don't, patient advocates. When there were the first trials on AZT with HIV, there were people with HIV invited to serve on these boards, members of the board, voting members of the boards, not just observers. So depending on what is being studied and the importance to the people with that condition, you may have somebody like that there. Important point. Everybody here needs to have some understanding of the other members' area. I had to learn a little bit of ophthalmology to be able to understand when the clinicians were talking about keratitis and what do they mean by that, and why the area of opacity that comes from herpes simplex coming to your eyes and doing this. First thing I did was I asked the person at NIH, can you tell me a little bit about this disease? I had absolutely no idea what this is. I didn't know that keratitis had to do with the cornea, for example. I was not medically trained. I'm still not medically trained. But you get enough knowledge of that discipline to be able to engage in the conversation and discussion. The same thing goes the other way. The clinicians had no idea of group sequential monitoring boundaries. And what the heck is that? I only know t-tests, I only know this, I only know that. I had to then give them papers for them to read that, unfortunately, the statistical papers were not readable. I ended up having to teach them stuff. And they have to learn enough to know why I was concerned with this method or that method, and do I trust the results of this, or do I that? So the statistical nuances of the analysis, they have to understand. Imagine a medical ethics or a patient advocate who has no scientific training. They need to also be. Why? Because they're engaging in a discussion, and usually you want to have consensus. And people that join are not just joining and being quiet and just participating. It's a waste of their time if that's what they're doing. You're not making any money. In fact, they don't pay you much to do this. They pay you a minimal amount for just like an honorarium. You're not going to be able to go and have even a good dinner that evening with that. So you're not doing it for the money. You're doing it because you're contributing to the science. And so if you're going to participate, you participate actively. Every member is expected to participate actively in the discussions. Nobody is passive within this group. And this is where the richness of the discussions helps capacity building. And this is why I enjoyed being that, because I learned so much, not just about ophthalmology, but how do we talk about the benefits, the risks, and the benefits to people that are participating in trials, and understanding how one should deal with that from an ethical standpoint. So the sponsor invites members, the sponsor drafts the DSMB charter. What is the DSMB charter? Kumar will talk about in detail. Is the process of the SOP for the DSMB you can think of. It's how the DSMB is to operate. We'll talk about its purpose, or the roles, qualifications of the people. It'll give a little bit about the study, the meeting schedules, the data review process, communication protocols, and reporting formats, this kind of stuff. So it is a comprehensive document. You'll go through that in detail. Usually there's a draft done by the sponsor, but the DSMB members need to agree that this is a good charter. This is the way we want to operate. And so they review it. And so the charter sometimes may be, depending on who is involved, if the sponsor is the study team, and the investigators, they do it. They have other key contributors involved in this process. So there's guidance for clinical trial sponsors that the FDA has on it. And I said that there's all sorts of details that Kumar will talk about more detail about on what is in the written charter. And part of this workshop is we're going to have you, in studies that you're participating on, come up with what would be the charter for a DSMB in your study. Okay? And so he'll talk more about the contents and so forth. Now, how do they work? They have meetings. Nowadays, they tend to be on Zoom, unfortunately. In the old days, they used to be in person. It was a lot of work, but sometimes they're in nice places. Like the ophthalmology one was in San Francisco, California, and I loved going there because I would go one day before and be able to travel around and do some sightseeing. But nowadays they're by Zoom, so they're kind of bored. But there's several meetings, and they all have different purposes. There's an initial orientation meeting, there are regular meetings, and there are ad hoc meetings. And I'll talk about what these are. The orientation meeting is the first meeting that they have. Ideally, it should be in person, so at least they get to know each other for the first time, because the members don't know each other necessarily. And that's when they review the draft charter and decide if they will like it or make changes, etc. And they finalize the report content and format. They're presented with, these are the mock tables that you will be seeing. Do you like to see it differently? Do you want this? Do you not want that? Etc. And they finalize their monitoring plans that they'll have. So that's a very important first meeting. And the study may not have even started yet, hopefully. Then they have regular meetings while the study is going on. And they have different types at the meetings. They may have different sessions at the meeting. There's an open session, there's a closed session, and an executive closed session. Okay? The open session is open to the study team investigators. It's open to anybody involved with the study, because what happens in that session is that you review the execution, the progress, the safety, study integrity in a blinded fashion. So they give you overall results, overall recruitment, or overall retention, overall follow-up, overall adherence, overall compliance, etc. So it's not by intervention. So who is there? Members of the study team, the steering committee, investigators, or external consultants. Why? To answer questions and to discuss emergent concerns. And then, after that open session, the people are invited to leave. It's a polite way of saying they're kicked out. They kick everybody out except for what we call the unblinded reporting statistician. That's the role that you've had, he said. In the closed session, what are they doing? They're reviewing the same things. Study execution, progress, safety, but now equipoise and integrity in an unblinded fashion. So they also look at recruitment by arm, follow-up by arm, adherence by arm, compliance by arm, adverse events, outcomes. They look at all of this stuff. And so attendance at this meeting is restricted to the board members only and to this unblinded reporting statistician who is presenting and interpreting the report to them. We'll talk about that person's role a little bit more. Now, sometimes they will go into a closed executive session or not. My experience is that that's happened maybe 5–10% of the times that I've been on a board. And we've actually demanded, okay, you reporting statistician, please leave. We need to discuss this. But it's not that common. But this is where only the voting members attend this final meeting to ensure unbiased recommendations. And the DSMB now formulates and finalizes its written recommendations to be submitted to the sponsor. So if this doesn't happen, then after the closed session, they do that recommendations. Now, some DSMBs, as I said, like the first one that I was not even part of the DSMB, but my boss said, come and sit down and be quiet. I can do that, and that can happen in the open session. I can sit there and be quiet. I was trusted to be in the closed session and be quiet and learn and see what is happening then, but I'm not allowed here. He also was not allowed here, for example. Only the members of the board. Yes.
You mentioned that you will be showing the balance by the outcomes, compliance, and this and that in these sessions. The closed session.
So,
who decides about the content? What will we show? How much will we show? And how will we show it? Who decides about the content?
so the content is usually proposed by the sponsor or the CRO or the blinded statistician or the study team. This is what we propose to show you. And at the first meeting, they look at those mock tables. So there's no data in it. It's just the table formats for it and the listing and the outline of what they're planning on showing. And the board will say, no, I want you to do this also. I want this to happen too. I want that to happen too. The board decides what they want to see.
But that depends on the timing of the DSMB meeting.
Well, yeah, what they want will depend. So, yeah, so let me say, the next slide is going to say, the purpose of the meetings will vary. So in the first meetings, the study has started, the first patient has been randomized. In this first or second meetings, depending if you do it every 6 months or every whatever period, you're not going to have efficacy data, but they will look at how is recruitment going? What is going by sites? Well, you don't have enough sites included here. What is this? What is the data quality? What is going on with that? They will focus on that aspect of it and safety. They will look at adverse events. Now, as you get more, then they will start looking at other aspects. How is retention going? Also, you've completed recruitment, so that's no longer important. Now, you look at people coming to visits, people adhering, staff compliant. They'll look at adverse events again. So every time they look at adverse events, but later on, as the study progresses and getting closer, now they're looking more and more at maybe stopping the study early because of futility or because of efficacy or whatever. So the purposes of the meetings, my experience has always been that the initial reports that you get used to be not on paper, now it's all electronic, but it would be the first report is usually like this. By the third meeting, it's like this. By the fifth meeting, it's like this, because the board always asks for more things. Never says, oh, I don't want to see that anymore. Maybe recruitment is one page that's gone. But they say, oh, why don't you do this other analysis? Why don't you do that? I want to see this. I want to see that. And they will ask you to do more and more. And you, as the blinded statistician, says, yes, whatever you want, I'll give it to you next time. You don't know what they're going to ask for. You don't know what they're going to ask for. You will, in your charter, you will have a draft report, draft bulk tables, but as the meetings progress, as they start asking for things, you don't go revising the charter all the time and saying what they're asking for, because what they may be asking for may be potentially unblinding people as to why they're asking. Why are they asking for you to monitor, give me a report with EGFR now? Oh, something must be going on with that. So no, all of these requests that come to give them more reports or analyze it this way or analyze it that way, the unblinded statistician knows about it. They keep quiet. They do the work. They try, if they're, that's why you want the unblinded statistician usually to be independent from anywhere in the study team. If you have that person working in the same institution that is running the study, you better have a good firewall between that person and other statisticians and other investigators and other people. And that is something that is tricky to do. We manage it at the Population Health Research Institute. We sponsor some studies, the investigator initiated ones. We have the blinded statistician sitting in this office and the next office, or sometimes in the same office, but with a Carol in between. The unblinded statistician that they know, they've been trained to not talk to each other. People that are hard to train are the investigators. They know who the unblinded statistician is. So when the study is getting close to the end, they like to walk by your office and see if you're smiling or crying. Kind of stupid things, because the statistician has no vested interest in whether the study is positive or negative. They think that we do, but we don't. As long as the study is done well, we are fine. And so, yeah, but you have to, usually, ideally, the data center would send the data to somebody out. And that person creates the report and presents the report. So nobody that's involved in the study, the blinded statistician of the study, doesn't know. Yes.
Why we think that unblinded stuff? Understand the arms, we need to reveal the arms, that is the drug name, or it's just A and B result.
Yeah, so in the open session, we don't have A and B. We just have the study overall. In the closed session, there is no guideline on this.
Yeah.
You can just say A and B.
Yeah.
And you can have A and B in this month's report, and 3 months from now you have C and D, and another one you have E and F, and you can do that if you want to. Now, usually what we do in the old days, we would send the report by mail, right? So we would do A and B in case somebody is sitting in the airplane coming to the meeting and he's reading this, and the person next to them can see placebo. So A and B, they don't know what's going on. But the members of the board know the disease. They know what to expect. They know that this drug causes a little bit of nausea. So they know immediately there. So this A and B business is just superfluous. But in order to protect themselves, what they do is they would say, call it A and B. And when I come to the meeting, the unblinded person has an envelope. This is breaking the code. If you want me to break the code, I will tell you the code. But most of the time, you say, oh, this. All right. So, as I said, the purposes of the meetings are different. And so this first meeting before the first patient comes in is reviewing the charter, and that's the that first meeting that they do with no data. Then they look at recruitment, the safety, and then they look at follow-up and end of recruitment. So now I don't look at recruitment anymore. I look at safety. I start maybe look at that, and I start looking at more and more information related to efficacy and adverse events, etc. When are they scheduled? They are usually scheduled at regular intervals. Why? Primarily because the people that are members of this board have other jobs, they have lives. And so they will come, not too frequently. I can't come every week. You're not paying me enough to do this, to invest my youth. Can't come every month. The most frequent I've seen has been every 6 months, every 4 months. So that's why I say you don't do it in studies that don't last long, unless it's very crucial. During COVID, when they were doing the studies in the UK, that board met weekly. Janice Willis was on that board. She was telling me about it, that they met weekly reviewing it because things were moving fast at that time. So depending on what is happening, you decide when is the reasonable thing for the board.
Because of the design of the study, or was it because of the requirement of the time?
No, it was not. It was they were reviewing, they had large numbers of people in the study across the entire UK, and the events were accruing at a rapid rate. And so you would get the answer in event-driven studies very quickly and say, oh, hydroxychloroquine is garbage, go. Now, next study, do this. That. If you cannot wait 6 months. By then, how many millions of people would have died?
They increase the number of sites to get more patients in lesser time.
They didn't increase anything. They took the entire UK because they had the infrastructure and the capacity that before COVID, where people were trained in not only in the major university hospitals, but in every little clinic around small towns around the UK on how to be a study coordinator for a trial, how to collect data following a protocol. They disseminated the protocols immediately, and the people knew what to do and how to randomize and how to do this very quickly because they had been trained on this before COVID came out. That's why we got all the information from the UK. The only place in the world that had that capacity to do it. And luckily, they were there because we probably would not have had those vaccines tested properly. We had them within, 9 months? The recovery trial, sorry, I forget the name of the recovery trial. It was in 9 months, we already knew in December of 2020, when March was declared the pandemic, by December, people were already using the mRNA vaccines. And so it's never been, it's unprecedented, the quickness. So imagine, how did the DSMB, they had a DSMB. People were dying. This was a very important condition. Everybody in the world was worried about this. And so the board met weekly. But in general, we don't have that situation, right? Usually it's about every 6 months. So, yeah.
The DSMB should be for each activity. I think 10 or 6.
Well, so this depends on the resources available, right? Because the members of the DSMB are clinicians that are of that discipline. So you don't want the board to be big. So if you have one DSMB with 10 different trials, like these are, one is a cardiologist and one is a oncologist. Now you have a nephrology study, or you have an ophthalmology study, you have a pediatric study. They have that expertise to know what is important in that discipline. No, so ideally you should have ones that are pertinent to a particular study. So yeah, you may have one DSMB for all cancer studies or for all, yes, but people, like suppose you are at a hospital, like what is it, the Arvind Eye Institute in Madurai that does ophthalmology trials. If you have one board, they're doing 20 trials at a time. But this board, their life is there. There are other people. They're not going to spend all the time because there's so many trials. So yeah, there's a balancing, right? So I currently chair of a NIH board that's looking at multinational HIV studies. It doesn't have a very fancy name, it's multinational DSMB, but it's looking at studies that are for prevention of transmission of HIV that are being done, sponsored by NIH worldwide, and they all have sort of similar treatments, but they're done in different countries and they're different trials. So we're monitoring 3 trials at this point, but they're all sort of similar in the disease, et cetera. And the people that are on the board are the HIV clinicians. There's 2 statisticians, 1 medical ethics person. That's 8 of us around the world. And so we see 3, but we sometimes it gets complicated. But we say the schedule of meetings is we see all 3 at one meeting. And then we see another. But if things happen that we need to meet more frequently on one, we'll talk about that tomorrow. We have to do that, and it's ethically demanded. But now we don't want to tell people that we're doing this more frequently because then we don't want to keep them blinded that something may be going on in this study. So that becomes tricky. So usually you don't have, ideally, 1 DSMB for 1 trial, but there are not enough people trained to be in DSMBs, and that's part of the problem. We don't have enough. Should be usually at another institution.
Who are the members there to take consensus for the DSMB?
No, so usually, let's say CMC is going to do a study in nephrology. So they would invite some nephrologists from some other. No, they're not members of the study team. They cannot be members of the study team. They have to be separate from any investigators. So if your investigators your clinical sites are all in Tamil Nadu, then they'll go to Kerala and get some famous nephrologist expert that knows about this to be there, or somebody in Delhi or whatever, but they have to be external. So the ethics of animal experiments is different. I'm not an expert in that. I don't know. As far as I know, they don't have data safety monitoring boards. They have ethics boards. Animal studies are usually, again, I don't have any expertise on this. My guess is that they're not in long duration anyway. They're short duration. But maybe somebody's doing heart disease and dogs. I don't know. Who will pay them? The sponsor pays them. The sponsor is the one that convenes them. So if it is the pharma gets them together and pays them an honorarium. In the old days, they would meet somewhere and pharma would pay their travel to go there and this and that. The honorarium by pharma was very high. But if it's a study investigator one, then the funding agency, NIH, if I'm a study investigator and I propose a trial in budget that I put in the proposal, I put funds for 2 DSMB board members meetings a year, and honorarium $50 a day for their time. Plus, you're not paying them a lot of money. And then in the old days, yes, they would pay for the travel, economy class to whatever, not pharma that pays business class, first class to whatever. And you would sit there, decide, and they would give you lunch. That's it. Nothing. You're not going to live from this. But you put it in your budget if you're, when you're writing the grant, because you know that you're gonna have. Yeah, oh, sorry.
The single sector trial.
So again, the reason if you need one is even if it's a single center, if it's dealing with a high risk population, the study is going to go on for a long time. The potential adverse serious risk for participants by your intervention or not getting that intervention. So people, you're in dentistry, right? So you may have people that will get excessive cavities or they'll have tooth that needs to be replaced or whatever. That may be called unethical, that you're causing this trouble. Your ethics board will say you need to have one, or whoever is the funding agency may feel obligated to say that you need to have it. I don't know if you said you're funded by NIH. NIH is a whole other problem because NIH has, as I said, they require that there is a DSMB for every study. Now, if you are part of a multi-center study for NIH, NIH has they're the sponsor. They get the DSMB. So you are just contributing patients to them. You are an investigator, that's fine. But you don't have to get your DSMB. You don't have to get your own DSMB here in India because there is one study DSMB. DSMBs are never for one site. They are always for the study, entire study. So then here, the responsible group is NIH together. Now, the other problem with NIH is like we do studies multi-center and we constitute a DSMB. Yeah.
Just to add,
No.
The NIH is not responsible for creating a DSMB. NIH is just sponsoring. So what they're giving is only money. They're saying, okay, sure, you want to run the trial, run it, but keep a DSMB. So they are the investigator side, or they are the
Okay,
investigator.
well, all right.
They
So
are
then the group of
responsible.
investigators. So you
No,
are
there's-
one of the investigators.
No, they're not a
There's-
site. They
they're
are the
not a
ones who
site.
are running the trial.
You're the only.
only site.
They are the only site and they are the
Oh.
one who's running it.
Okay, so if you're the only site, you need to have it. You need to get a DSMB.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then okay, I didn't understand. I thought,
Even if it's a digital health information, like a mobile app or something.
Yeah.
yeah,
NIH is crazy.
yeah. No, they will force you to do it, or they'll take your money away.
Yeah.
So that's their police is the money.
And
But yeah.
last, always the member should be outside your.
Ideally, yes.
Ideally, it
And-
is
and
until unless you
NIH
don't
will
have
want-
a invested interest towards that topic. You can have your dean of your institution, right? Like they don't. I mean, when I say that, Shrikant, we have seen people like Dr. Yusuf being on one of our DSMB, but he has no invest on that one because it is led by McMaster University. Likewise, in extreme situation, when if you can justify, have nothing to do with what you are trying to run here.
But so
Try
one-
to best.
Yeah. So the thing is that you have to convince others
Yes.
that it's okay. So I talk about optics. The optics are bad when it's from the same institution, even if they say, oh, I don't really care whether it goes on it. Somebody may say, yeah, but from the institution has gotten money from NIH. If I stop the study early, the institution loses. And the principal of the institution is now going to be mad at me. And so I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
No one will say that in writing. No one will say it verbally. But this is in their mind. So this is why we want it. Especially if it's an NIH study, you want to at least dot your I's and cross your T's. All right, so who gets what during the study conduct? So I have this chart. I have here the open session information. You cannot read it. It's process information overall, adverse event information overall, outcome information overall. Then I have process information by arm, adverse event information by arm, outcome information by arm. So this is the closed session information because it's by arm. This is the open session information. because it's overall. So who gets to see what? The study team, investigators, and personnel never see by arm. They see the process information. There's debate whether they should see adverse events and outcome events. I don't like to do it. My former boss did not like to do it. My current boss does it. And so that's why I put it's not possibly okay to do it. I don't like to do it myself. The study blinded statistician is in the same boat because they're the same part of the study team. The independent and blinded statistician sees everything. The sponsor usually tries to keep themselves away from any of this information. And so they will say, no, don't just give me how the study process is going overall. I don't want to be seen as interfering in the study. They detach themselves because it's good optics to be detached. Okay. It's review boards. Sometimes will demand things. You give it to them if they demand, but typically we don't send them information. The DSMB, of course, gets everything. Regulatory agencies during the study get absolutely nothing. After the study's ended, now you send them all the information. But during the study, they're not monitoring, they're not even seeing anything. So you may have given them the protocol, but you're not giving them any data during the study. Okay.
Under what circumstances the institutional ethics review board can see the outcome information by us?
Institution ethics board.
Yeah.
They partial maybe. They say, I want to know what's happening with my patients from my institution. From my one
From
particular
my own
institution. Yeah, not overall study. So we have this with NIH. So one of our studies, in order to get enough patients, it's not recruiting only in Canada and internationally, decided to go and get patients from the United States because the United States had a lot of patients that meet this eligibility. And so the investigator, so first of all, medical costs are much higher in the United States. So the funding that the study had was not enough for this investigator in the United States to be able to do the study. So he writes a grant to NIH to get supplementary funding to do his patients. So now NIH says, oh, we're funding the study. So therefore, we need to know what's going on with US patients. Give me a DSMB report, closed session information to our own new DSMB. We have a DSMB in the United States for just the US patient, which is stupid because they are not powered to look at anything because it's just one site that has, 50 patients, 200 patients or whatever. So, but they demanded it because they're given money. And the poor investigator in the United States came crying to us, I have to do this, otherwise they'll take the money away.
Doesn't that make that site unblind?
No, they're not seeing it. They study, they have their own DSMB. So we have a study DSMB for the whole study. And now we have a stupid little US DSMB to look at the US patients. Blinded, they unblinded, but the investigators are still blinded. So it's still
But site institutional review board can.
the site.
Institutional review board, the site PI who applied for the funding.
Well, they demanded, but they haven't, the site ethics board has not demanded. It's the NIH that forced them to have their own DSMB.
So it's a very extreme case,
Yeah.
an institutional ethics review board can request. Let's say you're sending an AE and everything, and they are observing patient level information, not summary data. And again, that's something you need to be very careful about here. This is all talking about reports, right? And that institutional ethics board's review is talking about a patient level information. And if they notice in their patient, they're having 15 SAEs or AEs, they will say, something is off here. Can you please check this one? Is my patient safe? Should I just stop every patient recruiting in that site or not? They can ask you. but you're not giving any overall information. All you're giving is that site information, not even by summary. You're giving by patient level information that there are 50 patients randomized in yours. There are 5 patients have an AE. I'm going to give you a summary of that 5 patients. Tell you, oh, this is the reason why it happened. Okay. Now they will be like, okay, I'm fine. Okay, this looks fine.
But again, this is extremely rare.
Extremely rare.
Almost never do they ask.
No.
How much of that document can be accessed by the site here?
Zero.
Documents? Zero.
If you give it to
Site
the
PI
ethics
won't-
board,
No.
you don't give it to the
This
site.
is an
PI at all.
independent board again. The institutional ethics review board
And
is.
who will give it to them? The sponsor or who? Because by arm and information will be available only to the data management
Yeah.
team and the unblinded statistician. Those will be the two.
So the unblinded statistician would have been the
It's-
one that would send.
Yes, it goes through the sponsor or whoever the principal investigator. It will come to them for sure, because they are looking at the AE and SAE. They don't know by the arm, but it will be again. 13 years, I've never sent even a single time anything to.
Yeah.
institutional review.
It's extremely rare. I
extreme
just put it
case.
as a maybe, but I don't think it ever happened.
Chicken.
Yep. Oh,
Just to say, in CMC, suppose we are part of a multi-country study, and CMC is one arm. I've seen sometimes where the IRB says we have to have our own DSMB. It's apart from the study central, it is not in India, because we have to be a bit careful. And sometimes, for example, they say like big studies will have a study website where the DSMB members from here can access that website. And then they'll say that this study, in the DSMB meeting, they've said, like, I can't say exactly what study, but in this study, there were so many side effects for this particular drug. So a caution has been issued in some country. They're a bit careful about this particular study because they won't say which arm, but there were a lot of arms. I'm being a bit vague, but so there is this concept of having a DSMB for your own center, even though there's a central DSMB. I know it sounds a bit weird, but there is that.
yeah, so that's the same situation as the NIH one, right? That the NIH for politics, basically, has come up with, we won't trust the international study DSMB to be monitoring carefully our patients. So CMC is saying, I don't trust the DSMB of the study to be monitoring the CMC patients. It's very unusual to have that because, as Kumar says, they would be looking at few patients and seeing trends that may be crazy, but they're, when you look at it overall, it's washed out. And unless they think that, you know, Vellore patients are somehow different biologically from other patients that meet the same eligibility criteria, it's sort of a strange thing to do, but it may be, again, policy.
Do they share?
Do they share information? They don't, they should not share information with the investigator. If you send it to a CMC DSMB,
yes.
they get it, they look at it, and they will say whatever, but they don't even tell the investigator. They should not tell the investigator.
Sure, DSMB.
They could inform the bigger DSMB, oh, you know, we saw, you didn't look at it by site, right? Because we have 50 sites, we didn't look at by site. In our site, there's 9 people that had this in one group and only 1 in the other. We're concerned. Is this reflected in everybody? Or whatever, something like that. And they will communicate back to that, but I've never
No,
seen that.
so in the example that Shrikant was mentioning, I am the lead unblinded statistician for that one. So again, just to go back, the central DSMB statistician would be responsible even for the country-specific DSMB.
Yeah.
You cannot have your own unblinded statistician for the country-specific. So, for example, in mine, I am the international DSMB statistician. I am the US-specific DSMB statistician too. I have no communication between the DSMBs. I don't take any materials from here to there. All we know is internationally says, I don't care what DSMB that you are running in your country. All I'm looking at is the totality of the evidence, and that's it. And I'm not going to share that information with anyone. You can have your country specific. I am not giving it to you. And I don't need your information either. because I'm not looking at in a randomized trial, we are not looking at by site. No decision is made by site. But NIH has its own policy.
Maybe I should give a little back on 2 minutes.
Okay?
There was a time when India was the hub of clinical trials. And then after that, people got very suspicious that because we are considered third world, without much consent, studies are being done. So we went the other way.
Yep.
Then DSMBs and IRBs were ethics committees were very, very strict on this.
Yeah.
And then so I've sat in some DSMBs where they're like, okay, in this particular study, in some other country, there were a lot of side effects. So should we be careful? Should we allow our recruitment to persist? And in some places they said, I think maybe we can hold restriction for the next 1 month. We'll tell our PI that we just want you to stop for a month. We won't say why, but we'll be careful. I think there's more of that kind of a thing. Which,
Overreaction.
one person dies in some country, and then social media will blow it up. This poor young man died in a trial and for this, and then so there is a.
No, and it's the problem with that is that it's not a systematic.
No, it's a bit of a knee-jerk kind of.
Yeah, it's not.
How frequent is regarding of aliens?
So the reports to the DSMB are determined in the charter at the start of the study, depending on how rapidly the study is being conducted, how rapidly the primary outcome is accumulated, but also how frequent is AEs as well. How risky is this medication?
So we didn't know how it will turn out and how it will be like meeting.
That was just logistics. They said, they could not do it every day. They did it every it was Monday. We will meet every Monday. Something like that. So it's the schedule of the people. It's as well that determines things, but it's most common is the frequency is every 6 months. Some of our DSMBs chairs will say, I'm concerned. I would just like to have these 2 tables every month. Just send it to me as the chair. And I will decide whether I need to have a special meeting of the rest of the meeting. So we have some studies that the statistician prepares, routinely every month, the report on the first of the month sends it to the chair. But the meetings of the boards are usually every 6 months, again, because of logistics. People have other lives. This is not their life being on a board. This is one of the activities that they do.
But also, to just answer your question about the AEs, it decides on the complexity of the study and what is the requirement. It is a daily reporting. If you have an AE, not by treatment, if a study team or the coordinator who are observing an AE, which is defined AE or SAE, it need to be reported to the sponsor as and when it happened within 24 hours. They would have a requirement because end of the day, what happens is if they are submitting the trial for an indication, the FDA is going to ask, have you monitored the AE and SAE? Oh yeah, I looked at it every 6 months. No. Why have not looked at it within a 24 months? Why necessary action has not been taken? Then you cannot submit for an indication. So sponsor asks the reporting of AE/SAE overall within 24 hours.
And so that's the correct. I'm sorry I didn't catch that question. So it is as soon as you know it, within 24 hours you report it and it's registered. That is the reporting of it to the data center. If you also have to report it to the medical officer sometimes, or sometimes it's a serious one, and the chair of the DSMB has to be notified. For example, do I need to unblind this person? So if a person is in a car accident, and they have a little wrist that says, I'm participating in this study. If something happens to me, I may be taking this medication. And now they're going into surgery and the physician wants to know, are you on it or not? Somebody's going to call. Who do they call? And so the person responsible for the safety of the person is the chair of the DSMB. So when I was the chair of this ophthalmology one, I said, Any call, automatically unblind the person. I'm not going to make a decision that's clinical. I'm not a clinician. You use your judgment unblind, automatically. If that's an emergency AE, unblind. Now others may do it different, but the reporting of a serious AE is immediate, within 24 hours, maybe within minutes, depending on life and death of the person. In the old days, we had not even a nice cell phone. We had a big little 24-hour cell cartridge that we had to carry. But that's individual patient safety. Now you have the aggregate patient safety. That's what the board in its regular meetings is looking at both things. They're looking at the aggregate in this arm and this arm, as well as they'll have a whole listing of, for each person, what happened. Adverse events and evolution, etc. But the reporting is immediate. Yes.
Do you have the DSMB has the mandate to make site visit and see whether? I'll tell you a story because this when the stem cell intervention was started in India for 3 diseases. One is for myocardial infarction and rheumatoid arthritis and stroke. There were 7 centers involved in the study, multi-site study, the clinical trial. So there's when we looked at the data, there's one site had 4 deaths, serious adverse events. So which was reported 1 month after the event has happened. The committee, when we looked at the date of event which has happened, then the intervention was started before they received the training from the DSMB coordinated center. So immediately 4 cases died that was reported to the DSMB. That means they did not have the capacity to do this intervention. So similarly, there's another, I think polio study. We wanted to go and see whether this is Indian site, whether they have the records in place and so on and so forth. The committee members wanted to see whether the patient consent, informed consent is taken properly, organized, the information are organized properly and so on and so forth. Fortunately, which was done properly. So I always tell Tambu because that the CMC has institutional sponsored DSMB. And whether they make a site visit to the department.
No,
so where it's not happening.
So no, this is not part of the role. That's more the role of the people conducting the study.
Yes.
Right? So the CRO, contract research organization, will be having site monitors and checking how the sites are performing on a regular basis, but it's not the DSMB. All right, so in the interest of time, I'll continue. So the reports will go in details. Kumar will go in details tomorrow on a template of what's in the reports, but you'll have an open report that's discussed in the open session. You'll have a closed report that is discussed in the closed session, so that is unblinded, at least by study arm. And sometimes in the open session, because in the closed session, there is no study-related clinician. All the clinicians are on the board. The only other person there is an unblinded statistician who may not know nuances, clinical nuances of safety, adverse events, etc. So there is sometimes in some studies, the medical officer that does a medical clinical report in a blinded fashion and discusses it in the open session with folks as well. One of the things that I like, certain reports that are given to the board need to be reports that are helpful. I call it user-friendly. People that are preparing reports need to understand these people are coming every 6 months. Do they remember exactly the protocol? No. Why should they? This is not their life. So it'd be nice if the first page says, this is a brief overview of what the protocol is all about. Tell us a little bit of, what are the prior meetings that happened? This is the meeting that you said you wanted to be looking at follow-up and retention. You have done this and that. So a little executive summary is usually helpful, and the context. We are reaching the time when you said you were going to the next meeting, maybe where you're going to be looking at potential stopping the study. So you're reminding people on the board of what's happening. So we have this executive summary. It takes time for the unblinded statistician to prepare the executive summary. That's part of the role. And then it has, description of tables, figures, etc. So we'll go more into this detail tomorrow when we talk about the monitoring plan and monitoring guidelines. So when they look at the quality and integrity of the study, statistically, it's nothing fancy. It's just looking at descriptive analysis, proportions retained, proportions that came to visit, etc. And so you look at numbers of protocol violations. So there's no statistical analysis. It's just descriptive stuff. Safety is also looked at. Maybe they will try to say, I want to see if this difference here is significant. It's very ad hoc. They may do it on the spot because the proportion here is bigger than that. But then they ask, please, we're monitoring kidney function carefully in this study. Please, next time, give me a p-value. They don't engage in argument. The unblinded statistician does not engage in an argument saying, well, I don't think that's appropriate because you don't have a hypothesis. No, yes, I will do this because you're asking. So that's usually ad hoc, where there is formal as well as informal statistical analysis is looking at efficacy. We will talk more about that tomorrow. There is the statistical analysis plan for the interim analysis is different from the statistical analysis plan at the end of the study that's in the protocol. This is how are you going to monitor the study. It is usually prepared by the study statisticians, and you submit it to them through the charter for them to approve and say, yes, we will do the monitoring the way you suggested. Will we agree or disagree, do it this way, do it that. So during the meeting, in the open session, remember who's there? The whole group is there. So the study team presents the report. The medical officer may present the clinical report. If there's one. The blinded statistician is there. Usually just listens. If there's anything that they need to contribute, they contribute. If there is an observer, the observer is there, quietly sitting in the back. There's lots of discussion. And minutes are very elaborate. There are all sorts of stuff going. In the closed session, everybody leaves except the committee. And now the unblinded statistician who's prepared the report presents the report. This person should know the inside and out of that report because they will be questioned. For in table 4.2, you had 23 people that reported such and such, but in table 7.9, there's 21. What happened to that one? They should have been there. You better have reviewed that report you created, and you know what to look for, because you will be questioned by that. And on the spot, doesn't look good. You say, oh, I don't know. You can't say that. I'll look into it. That still also looks pretty bad. You should also know some of the science to interpret things. You know, if it's a study on GI, you better know the difference between functional constipation and irritable bowel syndrome. Know a little bit about that science because you are reviewing the report before you present it. If you see something unusual, it's almost you're obligated morally or ethically, because they may not have seen it, some they have not looked at it carefully. He said, you know, I noticed in table 7 that there was more of this. Is this okay from a clinical standpoint? So you are engaging in discussion. There's lots of discussion. The unblinded statistician usually keeps the minutes, and the minutes may be detailed, may not be detailed, but they're in the United States, the minutes are never detailed because the policy in the United States is that if it's funded by NIH, the minutes are government property. And after the study ends, the Public Information Act says that that government property has to be disclosed. So if it says things like Dr. X said we should stop the study, Dr. Y said we should not stop the study, and the study was not stopped. Now the widow of a person who was on placebo is reading this public document and will sue people for that. So usually the minutes that are kept in the United States for the closed session will say the board carefully reviewed the information in the report and did not see any concerns from a safety standpoint. The study should continue as preferred. No matter all the 2, 3, 4 hours of discussion, one line is there in the minutes. If the study is stopped early, or the recommendations will be whatever recommendation, but if the study is stopped, now there is minutes that are very, very detailed of why did they stop. Those are kept.
Can you go back on the previous slide, please, where you're talking about the formal and informal stress analysis plan? Yeah. Do we need to show the formal final stress analysis plan to the DSMB? Because once the recruitment, the follow-up is finished, DSMB has nothing to do with it.
No. DSMB has nothing to do with once the study ends, not when recruitment ends.
Oh, when the follow-up ends.
Oh, when the follow-up ends.
When the follow-up ends. So formal stress plan, why do I need to show them?
No. This is the SAP for the interim analysis, not the SAP for the study. We'll talk about that. Yeah, we need to break now. I think. Okay, yeah, I can say very quickly because I have only 2 more slides. What happens after the meeting? Then they implement the recommendations. The blinded statistician may have to produce more analysis. In the closed session, the unblinded statistician drafts the minutes and may have to implement recommendations and do them quietly without, depending if they're in the same institution, so not alerting others that you're doing extra work. Because if it looks like you're doing extra work, that means that something is happening in the study that they're asking for this and this and this, so you don't want to do that. There's oral feedback that's given there. There's a written summary. There's confidential minutes. If there's an urgent notification to stop in the study, that happens as well. And I think I'll stop there.